You can change the world. Learn from proven change makers from all walks of life. They'll show you how to raise money, invest for impact, and so much more. You can start small. Start today and never quit. You can change the world by strengthening your superpowers. Now, welcome to the Superpowers for Good show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. Hello, everyone. I am so excited. We have with us today Stephanie Page, who's a remarkable social entrepreneur, nonprofit leader. We're thrilled to have her with us. She's working in the amazing, difficult, challenging space of addressing human trafficking, really on the ground in a local way. You are going to love this conversation and appreciate the great work that Stephanie's doing at the Stories Foundation. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm grateful to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, and thank you very much for making the time. It's an important conversation we're going to have today. I've got some pictures of this project you're working on. Why don't you give us a little bit of a background about this big project you're undertaking here?
Yeah, so we are an anti-human trafficking organization, and we believe in using business for good. And so we are working towards building Storyteller Café. And Storyteller Café will be a place in the community where people can learn about human trafficking, where they can be a part of the solution in a different way than donating. They can be a part of it through what they purchase: food, coffee, and boutique items from local makers and local businesses. And then also Storyteller Cafe will be a supportive space for survivors and those vulnerable by offering jobs, job training, and housing. There's 3 apartments on the top level.
That is so cool. So you'll have on the main floor then kind of a cafe situation, right?
Mhm.
And is it just the cafe, or is there more than that downstairs?
Yeah, so there's a cafe, and then there's a boutique area where we'll have products for sale, and some of the products will be our own products that we develop, and then some will be local businesses. And then there's also kind of like an event space for different, up to 50 people can be in there for different awareness things. And then the entire bottom floor can be everything can be moved so we can have one big event space. So the idea is to be able to have community events there and to further our awareness work that we do.
Okay. And then upstairs, you've got space for your office, and then also some apartments, right? And you mentioned that you have 3 little apartments and these are intended to be for the women who have been experiencing kind of human trafficking situations, right?
Yes. Yep. So our offices and then apartments, 3 apartments for women and possibly children. Will determine case by case basis who exactly lives in those apartments, but women who are coming out of trafficking situations.
Yeah, it's such a difficult thing to transition out of that situation. I hear just horror stories. It seems to me one of the interesting things about human trafficking is that at least sometimes the women who are in that situation don't always recognize it, right? They kind of, 15-year-old girls think they're making decisions, and yet they're being victimized, taken advantage of, exploited, and they end up kind of stuck. And they may recognize they're stuck, but they may not think of themselves as trafficked. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. I think a misconception about human trafficking is that it's abduction, and it's not abduction most often. It's a relationship driven crime. So, like you said, we have the average age someone is first trafficked is 14 years old. And so, what's happening is people are educated on what the vulnerabilities are of mostly young girls, although young boys as well. And then they look for these vulnerabilities to cover them, so to meet their needs, whether that be physical needs or relational needs. And they meet those needs with the sole purpose of exploiting them later down the line. So they earn trust so that then they can exploit them, can sell them later. So oftentimes people who are in trafficking situations, they'll think they're in a relationship, and perhaps they don't know what a healthy relationship is because they haven't had one modeled, or because they've never been in one, or because our culture kind of can glorify unhealthy relationships. And so they end up in these relationships that are really, really harmful, but they don't recognize it. And then by the time they might start to recognize it, they feel trapped emotionally and mentally, and they've been isolated by whoever might have been healthy in their lives, who they felt like could have reached out to help to. They now feel like they can't because they've been so isolated and so shamed.
Yeah, it's just incredibly tragic. And of course, then you have another layer that seems often to get kind of cooked into this again because of the those who are doing the exploiting, right? They will introduce drugs into the situation oftentimes, won't they?
Yeah, yeah. So when you have addiction that enters in, and a lot of times people who are being sold, they drugs might be introduced and they might willingly choose to engage in drugs to help numb them from the effects of what they are, what the abuse they're experiencing. Hmm.
But that creates an extra challenge for helping them leave that situation because now it's the relationship is important to them, even if it's troubled. It's a real relationship. They have a drug dependency potentially at some level.
Yep.
Even if it's not a full on addiction, they may be accustomed to that pattern. How are you helping women emerge from this, recognize the situation, and climb out of it? It's got to be difficult.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult for all the reasons you've mentioned. I think one of the more difficult things is that oftentimes people don't self-identify, like you said, as being trafficked, and they don't realize they need the level of help they do need. Um, our first contact right now in the United States with people who are being trafficked and exploited is law enforcement. And so educating law enforcement and working with the judicial system so that people who are being exploited and trafficked can get the help that they need through drug and alcohol rehabilitation, and specifically programs that are maybe 1 to 2 year programs immediately after you are coming out of a life of trafficking and exploitation. There's a lot of trauma. And so we partner with organizations that provide that immediate help. And we need more of that. We actually have lost a lot of beds and a lot of housing since COVID in directly in relation to beds for people who are coming out of trafficking. So there's more problems than solutions, to be honest. But having housing and having a next step for those that are coming to us, and then being able to show that there is something that people can go to that will help survivors and those vulnerable to leave the lives that they're in, because oftentimes they are free to make their own decisions, but they don't see where they could go. So we'll stay in an unhealthy environment where we're surviving um, for longer because we're surviving. We have to see the healthy thing that we're going to multiple times before we'll go to it, if that makes sense. So we need to kind of
Yeah.
create the solution so people will want to go to it.
So give us kind of a I want to be careful to respect privacy because these are such delicate situations. The last thing we want to do is re-exploit someone who's been so terribly exploited.
Right.
But as you look at the patterns, right? What are some of the first things you do when you get a call from law enforcement? Say we've got a situation. How do you begin to engage and help these women that have been in such incredibly difficult circumstances?
Yeah, honestly, the first step is to try and find them someplace to go. And that so it's like we're all in an emergency situation at that point. So when we get a call from someone, whether it's from law enforcement or from someone doing outreach, we need to find them someplace to go. And so we begin to call around to places that would have an opening. And the best place to send somebody would be a program for people coming out of trafficking and exploitation specifically, but we really don't have very many of those. So if those places are full, then we go to domestic violence shelters. single moms' homes if there's a kid involved. I mean, we just call every single place that we could think of where there could be a bed. And then the next step is once we find a bed is getting getting the survivor to the place where they can have safety. And there have been times where we've taken a couple days to find the bed, and then we connect with them and we send a car, and then they're gone because they're back out on the streets. Or so it's a really complicated process, and it can be heartbreaking. And in the United States, generally speaking, we don't have a great system for identifying victims and then helping them get the help that they need where they can leave the abuse that they're in. So, but in an immediate situation, that's our first priority is where do they go? Because they need someplace to go and they need it to be safe, someplace to sleep. And then from there, can we get them in a program? Then they have to do an intake. It's a whole thing. And anywhere in that process, because it is complicated, women will often will go back to, again, that place of survival because they need to continually feel safe and they need to continually see a way out.
Yeah, I can't imagine the difficulty in this. It's so scary, and I have heard data, and I think it's true, in Minnesota, and it's true in Kuala Lumpur, right?
Mm-hmm.
It, the women often end up going back. It's not all the time, but they go back because it's what they've become accustomed to, and they're
Yep.
so their self-esteem has been so eroded, right? To feel so worthless that they feel like, mom and dad won't love me anymore. I can't go back home. Of course, some kids leave very difficult situations.
Yep.
They may have been in a poverty situation and may have had abusive parents. I mean,
Yep.
really, these are tough situations. You're just doing the work of the angels here.
I
So
don't
I
know about
really,
that, but thank you.
yeah, I appreciate you
Mm.
doing kind of the impossible. Um, is there a case study, a victory that you like to point to as an organization that you could share with us? Again, I want to be careful about not revealing personal details, but maybe you've got something that you can share with us in that regard.
Yeah, a story that I like to share from a survivor that we worked with, and I think this is encouraging to, the people watching because it shows how when we think about human trafficking and what needs to happen, we all really can play a role in how we see people and how we engage with the people around us. So this was a person who had been trafficked for quite a number of years. She had a few children from with her trafficker, and she was going to her insurance agent. So I think again the common misconception is that these people are locked behind closed doors or hiding in a basement, and that's quite not the case generally speaking. So this woman, she went to her insurance agent, and her insurance agent asked more questions. She thought, oh, something doesn't seem totally right about this woman's life or whatever they were talking about. And she leaned in. And this insurance agent ended up being the catalyst to help this woman leave her trafficker and take her children and go and find safety. And to this day, they have found safety and they are, they're living apart from her trafficker. And I, I, I think that's just a beautiful story because, again, law enforcement is our first touch point. And these people who are being abused and exploited, they're all in our communities. And what could we do if we saw the people around us in a deeper way? And when we feel that something's not right, if we just ask those questions a little more, could we also help somebody get the help that they need and get to safety for them and their children?
Yeah, it just amazing, amazing work that you're doing. And it's so nice to hear a story of success because it's so difficult, so incredibly difficult. Well, Stephanie, we're going to take a little break here, folks. We're here with Stephanie Page, the executive director of the Stories Foundation, talking about human trafficking right here in the United States and in Minnesota, especially. Uh, When we come back, we're going to take a little short break. But when we come back, we're going to talk to Stephanie about her superpower. You don't want to miss this conversation.
You can get in on the ground floor to help fix the climate crisis for as little as $100. Pause now to scan the QR code to get started or visit s4g.biz/raisegreen. You can beat a green at Raise Green.
Want to learn from the world's great changemakers? Find your superpower. Subscribe to the Superpowers for Good newsletter at superpowersforgood.com. Make your strengths into superpowers that will change the world. Join the super crowd today. Superpowers4good.com.
Hope to raise money from the impact crowd. Good investors are as interested in community, social or environmental impact as you. Connect with Funding Hope, an SEC-registered FINRA member crowdfunding portal to learn how to raise capital from the impact crowd. Scan the QR code now.
Welcome back, everyone. We're so fortunate today. We have with us just an amazing human being, Stephanie Page, Executive Director of the Stories Foundation. She's working to address and help women escape from human trafficking situations in Minnesota. So it's an important conversation, but we're going to shift gears now and talk to her about her superpower. Stephanie, you really are doing just the work of the angels here, helping women escape from the most difficult circumstances we can imagine and helping them to rediscover happier, healthier lives. What is your superpower?
Well, before we went to break, I was talking about how I think it's so important that we see the value in people and that we see people. And I think that's something that's been developed in me, is to see people and to honor them and to see their humanity. And I really believe in sitting and listening to people's stories. And I think that we're in a time right now in our culture that we're very divided, and we make a lot of judgments about people, and a lot of our life happens online, so we don't sit face to face with people as much as we used to. And seeing the person in front of me and seeing who they are, and speaking life over them and making them feel seen and known and valued, that's something that I'm really, really passionate about. And I feel like if we all did that more, we would remember what brings us together more than what causes us to be separate. And we could really create change if we saw our humanity more.
Yeah, that's such a great superpower. I mean, I think we all want to do that, right? It's kind of a little bit of empathy. It's being sensitive, having a little compassion, but trying to see the humanity in others. So important in your work, and really, it's essential in what we all do. Right? As you think about that, do you have an example, maybe a story of a time when you used that ability to see someone and you thought it had some sort of a positive outcome, helped you overcome a challenge or something?
Yeah, I think everywhere we go, we encounter people, right? And when we encounter people and we see them at, face value, what we see, we could make a judgment. And I believe that when we do that and we stop there, we miss out on really important encounters with people. And there was a time recently when we were doing an awareness event here in our community talking about human trafficking, and I could tell there was a woman that wanted to talk to me. And we collect items to do outreach, big drives to hand out to law enforcement and frontline workers to give to vulnerable people. So I was kind of needing to be there to help with that, but I could tell this woman wanted to talk to me, and we ended up having this really long conversation. And she has someone in her life that had experienced unhealthy relationships that look a lot like trafficking, without having met the person. I don't want to make a judgment on their story, but that's what it looked like. There was definitely abuse and some hurt there. And I was able to create space in the midst of this bustling room for this one woman and her story and her pain and what she'd experienced. And I think that's the most beautiful thing. And when we don't allow space in our days to see the people in front of us and to stop and to look them in the eye and to really check in with how they are, or what pain they might be holding, or what gift they might have to offer you or the world, we're missing out on the beauty of life. I believe that's where life is lived, is in our connections with each other. And I think in our culture, we're so hurried that we just miss out on those moments and those experiences.
We do too often. Can you give us a tip for seeing the humanity in others?
Yeah, I think we all have it within us. We have gut feelings about things. Um, I think we sense when someone maybe is in need. I think we can sense when something is maybe off, and our culture tells us to dismiss that and to move on. And I would challenge us to lean in to what we're feeling and to listen and ask the next question. Just ask the next question. You don't have to be there for an hour. We don't have to solve anyone's problems. I'm not solving anyone's problems. We're creating space where people can see their worth and their value and their dignity as a human being, and then from that we can offer opportunities, and they solve their own problems, as on their journey, and we can do that for others in 5 minutes or longer.
Yeah, great tip. Well, listen, as we wrap up here, I wonder if you could just take a minute and tell people how to be in touch, how to learn more, how to support you. I think you've got some bracelets for sale. Maybe tell us a bit about that program, but we got about 1 minute.
Okay, so you can go to storiesfoundation.org to learn more about what we're doing. And we're really close to being able to build Storyteller Café. So we are selling these bracelets, and they say your story matters on them. And when we sell 30,000 of these, we will be able to break ground on Storyteller Café. We'll have all the funds we need. It's a $1.8 million build. So we'll be done when we sell all of these. So whether you are in the Midwest or not, wherever you are coming from today, your story matters, and we would love for you to remember that and to be a part of our story and what we're doing here.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, Stephanie, we love what you're doing and want to wish you every success in supporting and helping the women in some of the most difficult circumstances that I can imagine. We certainly want to see you succeed. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
All righty, let's do some good.